meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Today on the podcast, I have Kamille Justus, and she goes by Kamille or Kammy. We discussed this from the beginning, so I'm not quite sure yet what I'll call you. I think I'm going with Kammy, okay? Okay. Kammy was born and raised in Illinois. Same here. She is 25 and has been in the field of child welfare for the past 3 years and currently serves as a lead family support worker. Also, I hear there's very exciting news on the horizon.
Yeah, we're getting very close to our wedding.
Oh my goodness. Soon to be married to Daniel. Yes. And yes. When's the big day?
September 30th.
Wow, that's awesome. My daughter is also soon to be married in October. So we are in the midst of wedding plans.
It is overwhelming.
Oh my goodness. It feels like it's getting really real now.
Yes.
But she is slowly attending school because you're working full time and you have this goal of getting your degree in social work, but you are taking your time. I think that's great.
Yes, I am taking my time. There's no rush.
Also, as we are going to kind of dive into today, Kammy has endured some very difficult life experiences. But you're here in hope that the hard parts of your story will be able to help you connect deeper with children and with the parents that you serve. So you're using Absolutely. What has been hard for good.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I am excited to be able to dive into your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Kammy, let's start here. Can you just help us understand what it was like to be you as a young child?
Yeah. I think sometimes that's a loaded question because there are absolutely great parts of my life and, childhood. But sometimes that got overshadowed by certain traumas or, my family just not being able to provide like they should have been able to. So that's kind of shaped who I am now. I'm kind of a financial nerd now because it's just a really hard situation to be in, especially as a young child. All of our stuff was pretty much provided by our grandparents because, they didn't want us to come into care. I've talked with my grandma about that before. And they chose to not say something because they didn't want us to be with, random people, which is a huge thought when it comes to the line of work that we do.
Yeah.
So I was very blessed with two grandmothers that, fought for us really hard. And I actually lived with them from 2017 and just until like maybe 2 years ago when we bought our own house. So we were very thankful for that. But money was a huge deal when I was little. And having to grow up at a very young age and provide for our family, making sure that, we had groceries in the house and making sure bills were paid or, making sure my mom had enough money that she could. So I picked up in other areas. And I'm the youngest.
Okay, I was going to ask that. Okay.
Yeah, it was really hard. So I think that's kind of shaped me to who I am today, and very thankful that we have our own home. Always worried, always anxious about, all the bills and things that come with that, but we've really enjoyed it. And my goal is to break cycles in our family, and really start a family of our own and have these certain expectations and the way that we do things so we can flourish together and build a great life together.
All right. So you talked a lot about how some of your experiences shaped you, and you mentioned one being the financial. What are some other ways you've seen how kind of not having or not, being in a home that was necessarily, well, I guess I don't want to assume. So was your home, do you feel like it was unsafe? Was it more like the neglect that your grandma was recognizing and so she was covering and helping with that? Or was there also unsafety there?
There was a lot of neglect with the money, like we've mentioned before. But I don't think my grandparents knew the extent of physical abuse there was as well. And so I won't say that my brother never had any, my dad disciplined him a lot more and my mom disciplined me a lot more. But there was things that I didn't know I was getting disciplined for. I remember, getting hit with a hairbrush and it flung across the room as it broke, or like wooden spoons or anything like that. And I never understood it as a child. There's times that I talk to my grandparent, like my grandma now, and I ask her questions and she gets so upset because she didn't know how bad it was. Because I had asked to live with them probably like in the beginning of high school. And she would have loved it and she would have opened up her home to me. Cause that was our house too. We lived there when I was very young, all in one room. But she wasn't sure how serious I was. And that family dynamic of, my mom is kind of jealous about our relationship with my granny, and so it never really went anywhere until 2017 when I just couldn't handle it anymore. And now, I've had my therapist for 10 years and she knows my family and knows some of the things that I've been through. And just trying to work through that. It's been really hard because I feel like anything can kind of trigger a memory. So that has been difficult. So there was a lot of physical abuse. And then I grew up with sexual abuse, not from my parents or anything like that, but it just seemed like my normal. And it was very hard to recognize that it wasn't okay until I was older.
Yes.
So
and that's what's so damaging. Well, any abuse is damaging, just baseline.
Yeah.
But then when it's also like this dynamic where you're like, I don't realize this is wrong or not normal. It's just so much, it goes so much deeper.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. It's been a long road, I can think back and, I remember everything very vividly and I can remember, how many people or, where I was. And that didn't start coming out until I was really, really late in high school. When I kind of just took it upon myself, as soon as I turned 18, I was taking myself to the doctor. I was doing all those things because I needed to make sure that I was okay. That is one thing that I commend my mom for, if we were sick, if anything, because I was not a healthy child since birth. And she always took us to the doctor. And, I commend her for that because we wouldn't have found a lot of things that I had going on if it wasn't. But kind of when I turned 18, I remember handing me a hospital bill and she's like, okay, it's your turn to pay it now. And my grandma ended up paying it because she was just so upset that she would do that. So that was really hard, but, so there was never that safe space. So I was never able to talk about the sexual abuse or anything like that with her. Granny was kind of my go-to and, very close family members. And so that kind of shaped how closed off I was.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been such an outgoing person. I will go 110% in any kind of relationship or for a stranger. And then when I started therapy, I always blame my therapist. I was like, I didn't cry before I started seeing you. Like I usually kept my feelings in a lot. And then there was just that breaking point, and, my body couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
So, being in this profession has really helped me know what self-care is, because I never knew what that was. I was always helping everybody else. So that's been a very big work in progress.
I imagine. So there's a few things you said that have really, I want to ask more questions around. One, you mentioned, how there's still like triggers. We hear that word, we know what that means. Which is, I guess we'll just say, it's just when how would you describe even that word trigger, and then like what that means in your life?
It can be so subtle, and it's so hard to know all of your triggers until they happen. And so working in the field that I do, we see a lot of different things. I remember, my first maybe year and a half that I worked here, we had taken a sweet girl, she was 10 or 11, for a rape kit. So sorry, I should have warned everybody on that one. Well,
we can mention that trigger warning.
Perfect. But we had taken her for that. And that was so triggering for me after it happened, because I'm that person that I do well with pressure and, those traumatic events in the moment.
Yeah.
Because I know that, our kids or our parents need that support and that stable person. It doesn't mean I won't go home and cry about it later.
For sure.
And after experiencing that with her, it was just so hard for me, because I had, when I was younger, it wasn't anything more than, kissing or being touched or something like that until I got much older. And I was raped twice. The second time I got pregnant, and I lost the baby. And so seeing this, 10, 11-year-old having to go get a rape kit, it triggered me, because I never did that. I never wanted to go through that. And so after, we got her safe, we did all her testing, we took her to a home where she was going to be loved on and safe. I can't tell you that I didn't break down, because she was so brave through the whole thing, and kind of wishing that I had gone through things so I could change things for other people, maybe not let it happen to somebody else. And so that was a huge trigger for me. And there's been a few times where throughout their case, the child would kind of act out sexually because that kind of comes with the territory. And that would trigger me a little bit, because it was just sending me back into a place of my trauma. And so I think the best thing I could have done is, speak to my supervisor and say, hey, I need some space from this family for a while. So there's definitely triggers like that. Poor Daniel, when we started dating, it was very close to losing the baby and everything like that. So he was kind of getting the brunt of things. And for whatever reason, he stuck with me, and I am thankful. But I had to realize that wasn't his fault. And so there was just certain little things that would trigger. Like if he came up behind me, it was a little bit of a trigger. And so we really worked through that. And he's been great. I could never expect somebody to come into a relationship with all this past trauma and, deal with all that and stick with me. But he's been amazing. So
that's awesome. And I think that in those times when you feel triggered, are you feeling kind of your body just like goes on high alert? Do you start, I mean, what happens physically for you?
So a lot of it, I have really bad anxiety. And so a lot of it is like the heart racing. Triggers just do crazy things to you. And, sometimes I get really hot, kind of like I'm just nervous and I can't really figure it out. I get shaky. I don't know if you've ever been so anxious or upset that you just start kind of being jittery. That's kind of how it happens too. And then sometimes I notice, depending on the trigger, I just kind of shut down. Like I'm very quiet.
Yeah.
Which Daniel will probably tell you it's very unusual. So, it just kind of varies between triggers, but those are my main symptoms of it.
And the reason I'm asking is because I think it's really helpful for those, if someone hasn't experienced that and they see that happening, to the outward, it might look like you just kind of shut down for no reason.
Right.
And I just think it's helpful for us to have compassion for one another when we see someone acting differently than their normal or like quote unquote overreacting.
Right.
To just think, okay, there is always more to the story than I see. And just let's have compassionate understanding for each other as opposed to like snap out of it,
Right. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of my favorite things with my therapist is, she's done some group therapy with some random girls, and they get together and they just talk about things. And we've done obviously individual sessions, but when we're in group therapy, she kind of explains it, everything that we say here is, within the group. But we have to have compassion. We have to be open to what each other is saying, because, maybe Sally, she has a mom that just kind of discouraged her with like her haircut or something. Sure. But that may be so triggering and so upsetting to Sally. And we might think, that's silly.
Right. It's just a haircut.
So it really affects people with how others are around them. Right. And I think in social work and child welfare, it's so easy to kind of judge or make those comments to somebody else when you feel like they're overreacting. But at the end of the day, we have to understand these little things to us are huge to somebody else.
Right. Because they're associated with something that happened, a memory, a trauma. I think we just all could do better at being compassionate towards each other.
I agree.
So how, going through all this, it would be easy to think you want to go as far away from this kind of work from where you came from, but you chose to just dive right in.
I sure did. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, why did I do that? But, when I am in those situations, like taking the girl to the hospital and getting that test, or, resonating with a parent that lost a child or anything like that, it kind of gives me that purpose. That's why God called me to be here. And there's so many times, just recently where things get so overwhelming, you're like, I need to find somewhere else. Yeah. And you kind of put your feelers out there and nothing pops up and you're like, okay. And that's what I prayed about. I said, God, if I put all these applications out and nothing happens, I know I'm supposed to be here. And that's what happened. So we're still doing it
here. Well, and that's what I love about living a life dependent on the Lord is I can fully trust, like we know so many kids in foster care, the word father can be triggering, the word, right? But we know that he is a good father and he knows the best for us. We can't compare him to a human father, even a very kind, compassionate human father, because no one, excuse me, my pause. because no one is God except God.
Right.
And so my whole point being, I love that, I live that way as well, where Lord, I'm feeling some things, some questions. Am I supposed to do this, do that? Will you open the door? Will you shut the door and make it clear? Help me to know.
Yeah. And I think it goes, on a spectrum of, the smallest little things to such big things. And I think I've seen that throughout my life. And I've had so many questions all the time of, well, why do you believe in God? Or, all these things happen to you. How can you do that? And I think it's such a loaded question because I have been through so many things, as have a lot of other people. But I have seen God show up and continue to show up. And one of my favorite verses, I can't say it all off the top of my head, but the main part that I always hold dear is 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, he will always provide a way out.
Yeah.
And that is one of my favorite verses because I feel like through everything that I've been through, I go to God and he shows up for me. When I was really young, my dad was so sick and I was sick at home, but I was also in school. I had all these things going. And they had to revive him a few times and he was all the way in Little Rock. And my mom was there and, I saw the miracle of life that he gave my dad. And, my brother, we had the same heart issue, just so many years apart. And, he was fine and he's okay. And, when I was in high school, I was hospitalized for my anxiety and my depression because I just wanted to take something to just go away. So all my pain could go away. Yeah. And while I was in the hospital, all I could do was sing and pray to God and praise him for the help, which sounds so silly to some people. I know, but that's all I thought about while I was there. I had that alone time. And there was times after, the rapes and the miscarriages that I went to the hospital to get evaluated. And that very long stretch of time, because it's not quick, that gave me time alone so I could reflect on things. And I was deflected. I did get to go home. But sometimes you just need that time with God. Yeah. And I think that's been a huge part of my life. I may not go to church every Sunday or, anything like that, but I know the relationship I have with God. And I hope, down the line, I can bring that to my family and sometimes depending on, the person I'm working with, it can really resonate with them too. And my story's not off limits. I've been able to really talk about it. It's not that it's not upsetting because it is. It's sad. There's times I think about it and, I get upset or, why did that happen to me? Was it my fault? But I continue to pray to God because he wants us to come for the smallest things and he wants us to come for the bigs. Absolutely. He wants us, to praise and be there when we're disappointed, and he wants us to be there when we're encouraged and succeed, so I try to stick with that. It's not that it's not hard. Yes. Because it sure is. You want somebody to be mad at, and God takes it, You can be mad at him. He'll still be there for you.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have to walk it alone.
Yeah.
And that's huge. So what have you learned? I know that you have been able to share your experiences and pour out to the kids, the families you're serving, but what are some things you've learned from them?
Oh my gosh. So many things. They are so resilient. And I like to say that I can see myself in them. I didn't have to stay here. I didn't have to endure the rest of the things that I did. I chose to because I'm much stronger than that. And it took a really long time to see that. And, sometimes my purpose wavers. I don't know what I'm here for, but I just have to trust that I am here for something. And these children that I work with, some of the sweetest kids you'll ever meet. And even though they've endured so much, they still keep pushing on. And that's my favorite part of this job, is seeing them grow up. Unfortunately, I have to, because we have cases for so long.
Yeah.
And it's really great, though, because Wednesday, 2 of my favorite boys are getting adopted. And it's so good to see them flourish in that and see how far they've come. You know, in the beginning, you know, they're so mad, and sometimes, you know, they were so attached to their parent, even though that they had hurt them. And I saw so much of myself in that, because I always wanted to please my mom. I always wanted to please my dad. I always wanted to please any type of abuser too, you know, until the oldest one kept growing and growing. He was finally able to stand up to his mom. And that was the proudest day I have ever had as, you know, a support worker for him. And so being able to build those relationships and being able to encourage them to stand up for themselves. And, you know, I've had wise words from kids to me, you know, if I'm having, they'll be like, you know, what's wrong? One of our girls is so observant, and she knows when something's up. And so I've learned so much about resilience from them. And I'm very proud of them. I'm proud of our parents too. You know, our parents have been super resilient too. And seeing those successes in those return homes is amazing. And those make the job worth it as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's awesome. And I'm sure they can feel that from you. They see, I mean, I can feel it, the pride you have in them, the love, the care you have for them. And that's beautiful. You're definitely needed where you are. Yeah.
I'd like to think so.
Yes. Yes. When you think about, you know, the foster parents who are working with these kids and with these families, is there any encouragement you have for them? Any hope you have for them?
You know, I think it's so hard sometimes watching foster parents, because sometimes if they're new, it's like, what do we do? You know, that's so overwhelming, because you might not just get one child or, you know, a baby, or, you know, it could be multiple. Or, you know, our young foster parents that haven't had any children. And so it's so hard to move from like, oh, you know, I've taken care of my nieces and nephews. Now this is somebody else's child that is living with you.
Yeah.
And I think, from what I hear, the hardest thing is just not knowing what they can and can't do, and having support. And I think a fun thing that our agency is doing is hiring like a foster parent mentor. So someone that has been in the thick of it with, you know, having kids in their home, and just having that resource for our foster parents. I encourage our foster parents not to give up, as hard as it may be, because our kiddos are traumatized. No matter where they come from, they have trauma. And with trauma, behavior responses come. And so it can be so easy to give up on our kids if they're, you know, destructive, you know, as long as it's not affecting, you know, or harming your younger children or any children you have in the home or yourself. I would encourage them to keep going, because so many of our kids are waiting for you to give up on them. And I think
their expectation.
Yeah. And that's one of the hardest things, is I've seen so many kiddos go through, you know, home after home, because they're seeing how far they can push somebody to give up on them, because that's all they're used to. They're not used to safety. It feels unsafe to them. So I think that's the biggest encouragement is, you know, don't give up right away. Seek the resources, check with your workers, see what resources you have, check around your town, you know, don't give up on them. Have that open conversation with them. Learn what they love. You know, we tried to, we had one of our girls, I talk about her a lot. She is part of my heart. She was passed around because she did have those sexual behaviors. And then she would have outbursts after visits because she missed her parents, just like any of us. And so finding a home for her that didn't have any other kids, so there was no harm to them, was really hard. But we were able to set up a video visit with a foster parent, and they were able to chat over and see each other and kind of get an idea of who they were. They were able to talk about, what do you like for dinner? And she wanted pancakes. And so we went out to the store, got pancakes and all the stuff that she wanted. So when we were able to take her to the home, they were able to make that together and have that bonding moment. And so our agency is really trying hard to come up with those out of the box ideas to make both our foster parent and our children comfortable. So, I encourage anyone to kind of step out and, see if being a foster parent is something that they would be good at or want to explore, because we need them, especially when COVID happened. We didn't have a lot of resources for our kiddos and so many cases open because everybody was stuck at home.
Yeah, that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I just want to ask this, is there anything else that we need to know, anything on your heart right now as we kind of close out here, that you want our listeners to hear, to know?
My encouragement would just have an open mind, I was thinking about it earlier. We are so easy to judge a person's situation. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they would do that to their children. But you don't understand what they went through. One of our favorite interview questions that we ask our applicants is, why do you think parents abuse their child? And it's so interesting to see what people say. And it's not that it's wrong. But there is so much generational trauma because, our parents go through things. They're not just telling you no for a reason, or they're not neglecting you on purpose. It's so hard to think about my childhood and how much I can see kind of the disconnect from my mom and I. But I have to put on my, kind of realistic mindset and understand that there was things in her life that didn't go well, and she didn't have that nurturing from her father. And, maybe I missed out on nurturing from my mother because of that trickling down. So I really encourage people to understand that people don't do things for no reason. There's always a reason why they are the way that they are, and generational trauma is real. And so we have to give people some grace. And I'm not saying it excuses anything that they've done.
Sure.
But we have to understand where they're coming from as well.
Right. It does give us a lens of compassion.
Absolutely.
And understanding.
Yeah.
And if we are not investing in people as those who know the Lord, those who have come from healthy homes, if we are not then stepping in and saying, okay, this is not a perfect home, but here's what a healthy home looks like.
Right.
Or let me walk with you. If no one steps in, the cycle continues and continues and continues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are needed. All of us are needed to do the part that God calls us to do.
Absolutely. It takes a village.
Yes. Well, Kamille, thank you so much for being on today, for being open and vulnerable. I know that takes energy, and that's a toll. So I appreciate that, and helping us better understand kids who've gone through hard things, and just really appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.